So you're gonna come in. Usually, who's been to members of Congress before? Their offices. Okay, so they have all these rooms. They have all these doors, and you walk in. There's a small reception. You just walk in through the door, and of course, you're gonna be coming with your delegation. Introduce yourself. You have an appointment, so go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lynn Jackson from Albany, New York, and this is my friend Mel.
I'm Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer. It's good to meet you.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, so normally you're just gonna introduce yourself and you tell them you have an appointment at. Now, they have appointments, right?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, we have an appointment today at 4.
Can you join this delegation? You're just
Freedom.
Coalition
role
for
play.
Civil Freedoms, yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so usually you're just gonna basically have usually sometimes they're not, available. Sometimes you're meeting in a private room. Sometimes you're meeting in their lobby. Sometimes we even meet in the hallway. Okay, so we're gonna assume that there is the space. Sometimes they'll take you into the actual member of Congress and have a seat. So one person will open up the conversation. Basically, you'll say, they'll want to know why you're here. So how can I help you today? And then you're gonna introduce the delegation, whoever is a designated person, and then each person will cover like 1 or 2 points, preferably 1 bill per person or 1 issue per person. And then at the end, you have to make the ask. So it's really important. A lot of times people will go and they'll vent and they'll explain things and they'll talk a lot and they'll ramble, but they never get to the ask. The most important part is the ask. Okay? Don't leave that room without an ask and getting an answer. And the ask is either going to be to support a legislation or oppose a legislation. That's all they do. Now, if you have a different idea, like you want to actually introduce legislation, that's kind of a different route. You're not going to really accomplish it in these meetings. These meetings are that you want to put a human face, humanize this issue so people that are impacted, and to be able to make the ask. Tell them why it's important. And then the talking points should reflect things that connect with their values. And it's kind of a little bit at the beginning, it's important to kind of just say who you are, and identify that you live.
We have a family member.
The family member's going to do the role play. This is my session. Hello, everybody. Yeah. So, family members, you're all going to break up and do this role play. That's what we're going to do. We're just showing you the example here. You guys are going to do it. Then we're all going to break up into groups, and we're all going to do it. Not one by one. Everybody does it at the same time.
I just want one thing, can I mention? You might get some pushback because it is emotional stories. You might get less pushback, but let's say you want to ask them to oppose or support something, and they're not ready to take a position, and they start wavering.
Okay, well, we can get to that.
Okay.
Right now, you're just role playing. Okay, so you guys will be able to make. These are seasoned people that have done lobbying for a while. You'll be acting like however you want to act, and you want to push back. But let's show you how they're going to deal with it. So. Sometimes if you may choose just to come by and be supporting. So we're going to let the two, unless you're ready to pitch something.
Maybe you could be the family. You should be the impacted family member.
You look really impacted.
You should explain your family.
So normally
member.
this kind of meeting will happen before you actually walk in, right?
Yeah, because
Okay.
you're going to talk about how he was 7,000 miles away.
So remember, you're going to be concise. You're going to be to the point. Okay, so now you go ahead. You're starting. Lena.
Okay, hi. Please tell me what you're here to talk about today.
We're from the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, and my name is Lynn Jackson, and this is Steve Downs and Mel Underbaki, and we're from Albany, New York. And I know you moved. We're here to support federal prison reform, and Mel's going to talk about why it's important to pass this bill and what happened to her family member with this issue.
So that's the one with the...
Okay.
Remember,
Yes.
500 miles.
Okay. Yes, I have a family. My father has been in prison for many years now. I only get to see him maybe once every 2 years because he is like 1,000 miles from home, and he's got a very long sentence. And it's very expensive to go see him, and I'm hoping you will pass the First Step Act because it will help him. and me.
Do we assume that the staffer knows what it is, right? We assume that?
You know,
Or
that's
should
why I
we
don't know.
explain?
Oh, I would not assume anything.
Well, let me ask you, are you familiar with the First Step Act,
No,
which
no,
was
please.
HR
Well,
5682?
Listen, if you're not unfamiliar with it, you just go along with the role play. So you just say, what is that act again? And then that makes it obvious that they should have introduced it.
Okay,
I mean, that's it's gonna be conversational, so it's assume if they don't know, they're gonna
Yeah.
say, well, what is that act? Who's sponsoring it? So it's
Right.
important to know who the act, what the act is, and who's also sponsoring it, because that's how they track stuff.
okay. So
Well,
tell me a little
yeah.
about it, please.
Well, it's an act that tries to give more flexibility in terms of conditions of confinement, in terms of halfway houses, in terms of relocation of prisoners closer to their home, all of which with the result of ameliorating the suffering of all of the families back home that don't have any contact with their loved one, and allowing the loved one to maintain contacts with the community so that when they are finally released, they have more hope of integrating successfully. And that's, of course, what the whole purpose of the prison is. And it doesn't make sense to wall them off and prevent them from having these contacts.
And how would it affect your life personally?
For me, I don't have a lot of money, so I have to drive in my old car. And it's basically impossible to do that very often, and I don't see my father, as I said, it's like maybe every 2 years. And so I think this First Step Act requires that the prisoner has to be within 500 miles of home. To me, that would make it much more possible to go and visit him.
And has he met your son yet? Has your father met your son yet? Because he was in prison, right?
He has only seen him through glass. He's been under very harsh conditions, and so no, he has not.
What impact?
Okay, guys, let's not,
Yeah, so we
the conversation is not with her, so if she's not saying what you want her to say, you could just simply say, and by the way,
Yeah.
Mel, what she's not sharing is this additional stuff. So it's not, we're not interviewing her and all of a sudden, the conversation with her, you say what you want, and then,
We add.
you add to it. And Mel is just, is what she's also not saying is all these other things, and then you get back to, so normally what's good is that you mention the things and then, reiterate at the end, or ask is, will you support this legislation? Then we count on your support. And usually they want to know who sponsored it, because that's how they decide whether they want to get with it or not. Is that an ally or not an ally? So if it's a bipartisan thing, that helps. If it's just one specific, party, then you may get some pushback. And then others may be indifferent, like they act like they don't care, but it's still their job, whether even if they feel like, for you and for us, it's a very passionate issue, right? Like our family members are impacted by this. They have many issues that they deal with, so sometimes they may not, they may be cold about it. Don't read into that. Your job is not to sit there and try to judge them and say, well, they don't care, and then kind of, because they're your bridge to get what you want done. Don't take out your frustration on them. Remain professional. I mean, it's okay if you're human and emotions come up. I mean, it's okay to be yourself. But again, like, if they're trying to do their job and somebody comes in and is just ranting, it's overload. You may lose them,
The House passed the First Step Act 360 to 59, so it has a lot of support in the House. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he would move to compromise on this bill after the November 6th election if he has 60 votes. It seems likely there are currently 30 to 40 Republican senators in favor, and so only 20 to 30 Democratic senators would be needed. So is this something that you think that the senator will support?
I will definitely take this issue to him and speak to him more about it, and we should stay in touch. Thank you.
What strategy would you recommend? Who should we talk to get some leverage on this bill? What senators?
Come back tomorrow. Yeah, come back tomorrow. One thing that I want to, and this, I know that, breaking character, But I think talking about the anti-Muslim bigotry is not going to move any of the people that we are meeting with. So I would definitely focus more on the prison conditions, on learning and studying these policy papers that Kathy prepared for us.
Yeah, I mean, if the issue has to do with where they're located as far as the prisons, one, this is inhumane. It's separating families again. In America, people are doing their time. They still have certain rights. They should be accessible. There should be some sort of compassion. This is not a third world country. We have, even people in prison have certain rights. So emphasize those things. You're not going to use this appointment to relitigate your case. You're not going to tell them what happened necessarily, again, even though there's the emphasis that you want to, because people need to know your story, but this is not the right forum. They don't have the time. You're going to do the story injustice. You're not going to be able to tell it the right way because, and also there's no necessarily legislation that because at the end, you have to ask for something. And we're not going to change things overnight. If we can just get this relief, next year we'll come back with something else. The following year we'll come back with something else. Eventually, more and more lawmakers will realize the injustice that has happened after 9/11, and some of these things will be corrected hopefully in the future if we do our job right, and if we get the right people in office. If we get to have the same people in office for the rest of the time, then things are not necessarily going to change. And also, like what was mentioned earlier, if we are not going to be politically empowered, things are not going to necessarily change. They're going to start caring about issues when they see that we can impact the results of their elections. So we're not going to relitigate the whole war on terrorism problems in these meetings, but what we're going to try to do is at least address things that sit within their power right now, which are bills that are on the table that they can get behind. So now we're going to do one more role play with a community member. So basically you're going to come to the meeting, you sat down, you introduce yourselves, and then go ahead.
Hi, tell me why you're here today. Tell me a little bit about yourselves.
I came here today to talk to the Senate about my son who was incarcerated and the prison conditions. I live in Minnesota and he is way in Illinois, and I cannot visit him often.
So first, first thing you want to do is you want to just first tell them who your name is, where you live.
Yeah.
Where you come from, and then that we're part of the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. It's an organization that's coming up here to talk to members of Congress about this act, the START. I keep forgetting the name. First Step Act. And my name is this, and my colleague is, and then you introduce yourself as well. Okay, so let's try that again.
Yeah, my name is Yusuf Abdurrahman, and I'm from Minnesota. This is my colleague.
Hi Lena, I'm Sonali and I'm actually from Atlanta and also from the same organization.
And we're here to talk about?
And we're here to talk about our loved one who's in prison, and more specifically, our request to you is to really go ahead and move forward with step one, bill and
First Step Act.
First Step Act.
Okay, now so pass the mic back to him and say the reason why this law is important to us, and then explain a little bit about your situation.
Well, why it's important to us, this law is about the prison reform. For example, in this Minnesota state, and my son was incarcerated far away, and I work 2 jobs, and I cannot reach. Would like to have some change with the prison conditions and the visitations.
So when we're talking, you don't have to speak like necessarily in legal lingo. You can just be I'm in Minnesota, I'm working 2 jobs, and he is being held 1,000 miles away. I can't even see my kid. I can't see my brother. I can't see my loved one. This is not right. I shouldn't have to be a rich millionaire just to go visit a family member. And this is happening across the country to so many people like us. There should be some sort of limitation that when people are sent to prison, they're at least within reach, because by this they're denying us access. So you basically kind of say, that to us is just very unfair. We want to visit, So you kind of try to humanize it rather than, you know, trying to come up with the lingo. So even if you're talking and then you forget what the actual jargon is, what the actual law, basically you get the idea. I'm in this state, they're 1,000 miles away, really that means I can never see them. This is a life sentence of just never being able to see my life, and this is not what America is. You know, I'm an immigrant here, I love this country, I'm a citizen. We came here to have certain freedoms, and yes, my relative is in jail, however, that does not mean we cannot have any type of contact. That kind of thing. So, okay, let's hand it over to her and then make your pitch.
So I also have a brother who's now over 1,000 miles away from where I'm at, and he's actually in low security prison right now, and I have not been able to see him for well over a year. It takes a lot of money and time off, and then I have to also pay for lodging when I'm there, and it's just too expensive for me. And so I would love it if he could be closer to Georgia and in Georgia. To home, and that's why I would like to request that Senator McConnell go forward with this first step.
Okay, go ahead and respond.
I don't know. I don't have a response.
Okay, well just say thank you very much for coming in.
Okay, but think of actual questions that they might be asked.
Well, there might be some pushback, but some of the response would be like, okay, you know, how long have you been impacted by this? Why are they, you know, what is the issue? Who else have you talked to about this? Have you talked, what other members of Congress have signed in? Because sometimes what we do is, for example, guys, when we go on the Hill, they'll say, how was the response been from some of the other members? And they'll write down notes. So it's important when you go to offices that you yourself are writing notes of who else you talk to, what offices, what's the staff name. Because they sometimes want to pick up the phone and talk to them and say, oh, where's your office on this issue? Is there something we can do on this together? Because these members of Congress don't want to necessarily act on their own, okay? And then also, at the end, you should make the hard ask. Can we count on you to vote for this, you know, to support this legislation? Always, you have to say that and then wait. And if they try to say, well, you can also come back and say, well, traditionally, you know, just from hearing what we had to say, which side would you the member lean on? Do they, you know, do you think that they would be sympathetic to something like this? Are they, you know, is this something that's a priority for them, or is this something that they care about?
You can probe like that.
Yeah, you can probe. You can ask. You just like kind of just to feel them out, and then write notes because that's important for the next meeting. It's called institutional like memory. You write it down, you track it, and the next time you say, you know, well, last time I spoke to this person in your office.